Across the volcanic grasslands of the eastern ranges, a predator moves at speeds no other land creature can match. This is Arcanine. Known to ancient cultures as legendary, not for myth, but for how rarely one survives long enough to be seen. Fewer than 1 in 12 Growlithe pups survive their first year. Fewer still endure the metabolic inferno required to reach maturity, a process that burns hotter than muscle can safely withstand. Most fail long before adulthood. This is the story of that journey, and why so few complete it. Growlithe births are not random events. They are precisely timed biological calculations. Females enter estrus only when ambient ground temperatures exceed a critical threshold, typically during the late dry season, when volcanic soil retains heat well into the night. This thermal window lasts mere weeks. Mate outside of it, and the litter will not survive. Even under ideal conditions, mortality is severe. A typical litter contains 4 to 6 pups, but field studies suggest fewer than 2 will reach weaning age. The causes are numerous. Cooling overnight temperatures can slow neonatal metabolism past the point of recovery. Predators target dens during the vulnerable first weeks. Siblings compete for position against the mother's underbelly, and the weakest are often pushed to the margins where heat loss accelerates. The species has adapted to this brutality through sheer reproductive output. Females may produce multiple litters across a lifetime, gambling that at least some offspring will be born into the narrow window where survival is possible. For Growlithe, birth is not a beginning. It is the first of many filters. A newborn Growlithe cannot regulate its own body temperature. Its internal furnace, the flame gland cluster nestled between the lungs, remains dormant for the first 3 weeks of life. Without this primary heat source, the pup is entirely dependent on external warmth. The mother rarely leaves the den during this phase. She curls around her litter, her own elevated body heat substituting for what their bodies cannot yet produce. If she is forced to hunt, the pups begin losing core temperature within minutes. Their lungs compound the problem. Underdeveloped alveolar tissue limits oxygen uptake, which restricts metabolic rate. The pups cannot generate heat because they cannot yet breathe efficiently enough to fuel combustion at the cellular level. The flame glands themselves are unstable. Tissue samples from deceased neonates reveal inconsistent glandular structure, with ducts that fail to form properly or ignition cells that never activate. These are not injuries. They are developmental failures, present from birth. For those that survive, the 3rd week marks a turning point. The glands flicker to life, the lungs expand, and the pup takes its first independent breath of heated air. Until then, survival is not counted in days. It is counted in how long the heat holds. By 6 weeks, a surviving Growlithe pup begins moving beyond the den entrance. Its legs are disproportionately long relative to its body mass, an adaptation that prioritizes stride length over early stability. This creates an awkward developmental stage. The skeletal frame grows faster than the muscles required to control it. Juvenile Growlithe stumble frequently, their coordination lagging behind their ambition to explore. In volcanic terrain, a single misstep can mean a fatal fall or a burn from exposed fumaroles. Muscle fiber composition shifts rapidly during this period. Early fibers are slow twitch, suited for sustained low-intensity movement. But within weeks, fast twitch fibers begin replacing them, preparing the body for explosive sprints. This transition is energetically expensive and leaves juveniles fatigued and vulnerable. The pups that survive this phase share a common trait: cautious movement. Field observations show that juveniles who explore aggressively suffer higher injury rates than those who remain close to the den and practice controlled movements on stable ground. Speed will come later. At this stage, restraint is the survival advantage. The body is still unfinished, and the next change will test whether it survives its own power. Around 8 weeks of age, the first flames appear. This is not a triumphant milestone. It is a metabolic crisis. The flame glands, now active, begin producing combustible secretions faster than the juvenile body can regulate. The result is erratic, uncontrolled bursts of fire, often triggered by stress, sudden movement, or even digestion. The biological mechanism is simple but dangerous. Hydrogen-rich compounds synthesized in the glands mix with oxygen in a specialized ignition chamber near the throat. When the mixture ratio is correct, controlled exhalation produces flame. When it is not, the ignition fails, or worse, occurs internally. Internal misfires cause severe damage to throat tissue, esophageal lining, and occasionally the glands themselves. Field necropsies of juvenile Growlithe reveal scarring consistent with repeated internal burns. Many do not survive a single major misfire. Survivors develop regulation through trial and repetition. The neural pathways connecting the brain to the gland cluster must be trained, not inherited. Each successful exhalation reinforces the correct sequence. Each failure risks permanent injury. This is why juveniles in the wild often appear to hiccup or cough small sparks. They are practicing. The flames are not weapons yet. They are lessons the body is still learning to survive. At roughly 10 weeks, the mother stops regurgitating food for her pups. This is not a gradual transition. It is an abrupt withdrawal that forces juveniles into immediate behavioral change. The shift is metabolically brutal. A weaning Growlithe requires nearly 3 times the caloric intake per kilogram of body mass as an adult. Its flame glands are now active and consuming fuel continuously. Its muscles are mid-transition between fiber types. Its bones are still lengthening. Every system demands energy simultaneously. Prey must now be caught, not received. Juveniles begin targeting small, ground-dwelling creatures, volcanic insects, burrowing rodents, and slow-moving reptiles that shelter in rock crevices. Success rates are low. A juvenile may attempt dozens of hunts before securing a meal. Failed hunts carry compounding consequences. Energy spent chasing prey is energy not available for thermoregulation. A hungry juvenile begins burning internal reserves, which destabilizes flame production. The cycle accelerates. Hunger leads to weakness, weakness leads to failed hunts, and failed hunts deepen the energy deficit. Field data confirms this bottleneck as the single highest mortality period outside the neonatal phase. Those who clear it emerge leaner, faster, and neurologically wired for predation. Those who do not are rarely found intact. By 4 months of age, surviving juveniles are pushed outward. The mother's tolerance ends. Littermates become competitors. The den that once meant safety now means conflict. Subadults disperse into marginal territory, areas at the edges of established adult ranges where resources are sparse but competition is lower. These zones are often geologically unstable. Younger lava fields with thin soil, fewer prey refuges, and unpredictable thermal vents. Navigation becomes the critical skill. A subadult must learn to read the landscape, identifying safe movement corridors, reliable heat sources for overnight rest, and hunting grounds that will not be contested by larger individuals. Those who fail to build accurate mental maps wander into dangerous terrain or circle back into occupied territory where they are driven out violently. Mortality during this phase is less visible than in infancy but equally severe. Subadults simply vanish. They do not return to known ranges. Their remains are rarely recovered. The few that succeed do so through pattern recognition and spatial memory. They learn which routes yield food, which areas to avoid, and when to move. This knowledge cannot be inherited, and mistakes here are not corrected twice. Between 8 and 14 months, the Growlithe body completes its structural transformation. Lung capacity expands dramatically. The alveolar surface area nearly doubles, allowing for sustained high oxygen intake during prolonged exertion. This is essential. An adult Growlithe, and eventually an Arcanine, can maintain pursuit speeds exceeding 60 kilometers per hour. Without adequate respiratory infrastructure, such movement would cause oxygen debt within seconds. The joints undergo simultaneous reinforcement. Cartilage thickens at the shoulder and hip sockets. Tendons lengthen and toughen. The skeletal frame, once fragile and elongated, now bears the dense musculature required for explosive acceleration and rapid directional change. Heat dissipation matures last. Subcutaneous venting channels, unique to this lineage, develop along the neck, spine, and inner legs. These channels allow excess thermal energy to escape during high-speed movement, preventing internal overheating that would otherwise shut down muscle function within minutes. The body is now capable of what the species demands: long-range patrol, high-speed pursuit, sustained territorial defense. But capability does not guarantee success. The final threshold is not physical, it is territorial. Securing ground means either finding unoccupied land or displacing a weaker holder. A mature Growlithe must secure a territory large enough to support its caloric needs, typically 15 to 40 square kilometers depending on prey density and thermal geography. This requires either claiming unoccupied land, increasingly rare as populations stabilize, or displacing a weaker holder. Territorial challenges are brief but definitive. Rivals display through flame projection and vocal signaling, escalating to physical contact only when neither withdraws. Injuries sustained in these encounters often prove fatal not from the wounds themselves, but from the subsequent inability to hunt or thermoregulate. Most individuals never hold territory. They persist in marginal zones, gradually weakening as resources diminish and competition intensifies. These floaters may survive for years without breeding, their genetic contribution to the population functionally zero. The few that secure viable ranges transition into solitary existence. Social bonds, formed briefly in youth, dissolve entirely. The adult Growlithe patrols alone, hunts alone, and rests alone. Survival is possible. Longevity is optional. A territory holder can reproduce. A floater cannot. But reproduction carries extreme costs. Males must patrol expanded ranges during breeding season, burning energy reserves that take months to rebuild. Females must sustain gestation, lactation, and denning through the most thermally volatile period of the year. Both sexes emerge weakened. Field studies estimate that a breeding adult loses up to 20% of body mass during a single reproductive cycle. In unstable environments, where prey availability fluctuates with volcanic activity or seasonal burn cycles, this loss may not be recoverable before the next breeding window. The result is low lifetime fecundity. A female may produce only 2 to 4 litters across her lifespan, and not all will survive to weaning. Males may sire more offspring, but at the cost of accelerated joint degradation and reduced territorial tenure. Lifespan reflects this trade-off. Breeding adults rarely survive beyond 8 to 10 years. Non-breeding floaters may live longer, but leave no descendants. When a Growlithe reaches full maturity and claims stable territory, the surrounding ecosystem reorganizes. Prey populations shift their ranging patterns, avoiding high-use corridors and concentrating in refuge zones. This redistribution reduces overgrazing in some areas while increasing pressure on others. The predator's presence creates a landscape of fear that shapes herbivore behavior as powerfully as direct predation. Fire cycles accelerate. A patrolling adult ignites dry vegetation through incidental flame discharge, clearing deadfall and stimulating heat-adapted seed germination. These controlled burns prevent larger, catastrophic wildfires that would otherwise devastate habitat continuity. In rare cases, the developmental threshold is crossed entirely. The Growlithe evolves into Arcanine, an apex presence so dominant that its territory may exceed 100 square kilometers. At this stage, the individual becomes a keystone organism, its movements dictating the rhythm of an entire region. From a fragile pup that could not survive a cool night, to a force that reshapes the land itself. This is the Arcanine lineage, built by fire, defined by attrition,